Wicked. Right, we might as well get started then, guys. We're running a little bit late, which for session one isn't ideal. What can you do? Welcome everybody to the first of the integrated academic foundation training program sessions. And the plan is over the next 12 weeks or so to try and cover some of the important bases in academic practice, really, and really look to give you a good grounding on which to build a clinical academic career. Now, I say the words clinical academic career very specifically because what we're not going to be able to do, and what we don't want to do, is show you how to be like a hardcore scientist burrowed away in a lab somewhere. You know, practicing medicine alongside delivering an academic career is a challenge in and of itself. And what Professor Griffith and I want to do is really try and give you the lessons that we learned early on in our careers. And certainly I want to tell you the things I wish someone had told me early on, so that you can, from early in your career, really start to factor in academics as part of your career plan, hopefully. On top of that, what I want to do is give you some of the important skills to help deliver projects at your stage in your career. Again, what I can't do is give you, an instruction how to win a Nobel Prize, or necessarily how to win, 7-figure grants and so on. That's for another time. But what hopefully we can do is give you some skills, if you like, to deliver those small to medium-sized projects that set you on the right path. And if nothing else, you should be able to deliver those projects at your stages now, and hopefully decide whether you want to be in clinical academic practice as you move through your career. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen, hopefully, which you will all now be able to see without a shadow of a doubt. And I'm just going to run through this talk, which will get us started with session one. So as I say, this is the academic training program, and it's really for foundation doctors, and some of you I know online are medical students, some I've met and some I haven't. And the first portion of this is going to tell you what I'm going to tell you over the coming 12 weeks, and then we'll delve into the first session, a bit about what research is and why we're bothering to invest all this time, effort, and frankly, billions of pounds and dollars into it. So here's the program. So we want to train foundation trainees and medical students as they join us in the essential elements of academic surgery. Now, we've said surgery because us and the faculty are generally surgeons and we work in academic surgery, but it applies across the length and breadth of medicine. And the great thing about academics is the principles are always the same. We're aiming to create a group of early career doctors and allied health professionals and so on who are both competent and enthused about clinical research. It really is much more exciting than you're led to believe in your undergraduate careers. And really, it's a chance for you to be really creative in medicine, where that doesn't always exist in the clinical paths. We also kind of selfishly want to create this pool of trained clinical researchers who hopefully we can tempt into the systems at Queen Mary and help you build your academic career so that you work with us to change the world, change clinical practice. So we kind of want to show you how awesome it is and keep you on board and hopefully get you to join our departments and produce over the coming few years. So what are the learning objectives for this program? Now, like I say, I can't teach you how to be a Nobel Prize winner. I can't necessarily teach you how to win millions in grants and be on the TV and be the go-to person. But what I can do is try and help you meet these learning objectives, which are things I wish I knew years and years ago when I started. And these are some of the things I'm still having to learn in a difficult way now. I want you to be able to create a research question that can be answered. And that's where this all starts from. Unless you can think, well, I wonder what the answer to this particular question is, research really goes nowhere. And that's kind of the roadmap, and is the first thing we'll tackle. I want you to be able to select and justify a study design for answering a question, i.e., how are you going to answer that question that you set yourselves in stage one? There's loads of ways of answering questions in clinical research, and we're going to talk through each of those, kind of the mainstream ones admittedly, but we're going to talk through each of those to help you choose a system that's going to help you answer your question. The first step in doing that is, of course, looking at what's already been done. And this is a skill that I found is consistently underestimated by early career researchers. Understanding what's gone before means you can create new directions and stand on the shoulders of those authors in the past. And so you need to be able to find the work that's already been done, understand it, and decide where the gaps are so you can formulate your question and go on and answer it and win that Nobel Prize later in your career. I want you to understand why patients have to be not just involved as subjects of research, but why they should be involved early on in designing your research and so on. In a nutshell, we shouldn't be doing research that doesn't matter to patients. At the end of the day, this whole billions and billions and billions of pounds and hundreds of years is all about doing good for the patient, right? So they should be involved from early on. And we're going to explain to you not only why that's the case, but how that can be done. We're going to talk about ethics, which, as the years go by, becomes more and more important. Not just like, can we do research, but should we do it? And how can we make sure we do it in a way that's fair to everybody and doesn't discriminate against sections of society or particular groups of people? And that's a whole science in itself. And we're going to spend some time talking about the ethical approval of a study and how you can design studies to make sure you appeal to the broadest audience. We're then going to move forwards into understanding the practicalities of actually delivering research, using things like the NIHR, that should be, rather than NIJR, it should be NIHR, the National Institute for Health Research, the MRC, the Medical Research Council, and really what they do, because it's easy to get research done without really appreciating that there's this vast infrastructure that exists at the higher echelons of clinical research. And we'll try and do our best to show you the map of what's available and how you can start early on in your career engaging with those, so that as you rise through registrar and into consultant and hopefully into academic practice, you're already embedded in those frameworks. And it's something that I've missed out on in my career so far, and I don't want the same thing to happen to you. And then, of course, we're going to turn our attention to the output of research. So it's all good and well doing projects and having them funded and all that sort of stuff, but unless the world knows about it, it's kind of pointless doing it. So how do you go about disseminating your findings? How do you create a poster that's good enough to compete for an academic prize? How do you build something that people are going to want to read and go away and tell their friends and colleagues about? What about publishing papers? Early on in your career, it's all about numbers of papers, right? How do you write a paper that's good and clear and gets published and that the editors want to see and build up those citations? And lastly, towards the end of the course, we're hopefully going to mug the brains of some of us very senior colleagues to tell you how they planned their route as a surgeon scientist or a clinical trialist and integrated good clinical practice with their abilities in academia. So we're going to try and cover quite a lot of ground, but hopefully you can see that we go from planning studies, through designing them, through delivering them, to then disseminating them, and how you can factor that into your career day to day. So over the 12 weeks, we're going to cover a few kind of specific learning objectives. So week 1 today, we've talked a bit about the learning objectives of the program. We're going to talk about what research is, what does it do, and when we say things like the best treatments, what does that actually mean? And this is really key because this is what it's all about. Going forward to next week, we'll start talking about, well, where does research begin? How do you get a good idea together that you can answer? How do you turn that good idea into a research question? And we'll use that to inform designing questions using the PCOT structure, which some of you may have heard of, but really is the absolute #1 foundation and is the first thing that people will ask when you walk in the room and say, oh, I want to do some research. We'll then spend a bit more time on the questions, and you'll come up with research questions and you'll present them to the group, and hopefully we can all kind of come together and critique those questions and offer some feedback as to how they can develop. Developing questions takes time and effort. It's not just a 5-minute job. And so what we want to do is help you inform that process and help you design the questions such that they can be answered and they're not meaningless. And the question really sets your direction. So that's really, really key. We'll also get some people on board to try and help us understand the most frequent failure points when it comes to designing a question, to try and avoid you having to go back to the question when you've already started the work. Week 4, we'll start talking about how are you actually going to answer that question? How do you actually do research and what does that mean? And we'll start by talking about the different study designs, some of which you'll have heard of, some of which you may not have, and all of which will develop the ideas. And we'll start talking about the advantages and disadvantages of each. And this goes beyond what you talk about at undergrad, like what are the weaknesses of an observational versus a randomized control study, but actually in the mechanics of delivering these clinical trials. Actually, what are the challenges of doing it one way over the other way? And we'll then start talking about the appropriate design for the questions that you came up with in the previous weeks and the strengths and weaknesses of doing each different methodology. In week 5, we then start turning our attention to the existing literature. Now, I can hear all of you yawning already, but let me tell you that fundamental literature searching and appraising the literature is absolutely key. Unless you know where we've been and what we already know, you can't, for an instant, talk about where you're going to go in future. So we'll talk about how we search the literature using the databases. We'll talk about how we review the literature and how we tell how good or bad a particular paper is. And spoiler alert, most papers are not good. I'm going to share with you some of the tools I used during my thesis to assess papers, and we'll actually do it for real on some small studies in small groups. We'll then use that to help you learn how to present a critical appraisal to the group, to discuss study strengths and weaknesses. And that's really important because that's the first thing you'll have to do in, say, a PhD defense. I'm then going to spend a lot of time over the weeks emphasizing the importance of the clinical bottom line. And for the first time, I shall tell you, the clinical bottom line is what does it mean for the clinicians on the ground? Okay, not the super genius researcher, but actually if I'm a surgeon or a doctor or a nurse or an AHP or a physio, actually treating patients in clinic, I want to know what that study says to me. Okay, and we'll spend a bit of time starting to develop that idea in week 5. Week 6 will turn to involving patients, as I say, and try and understand why patients and the general public should be involved in research, nay, must be involved in research. And we'll also start to work out how patients are involved at an early stage. And we'll have some of our colleagues from the trials unit explain how it's done and how trials have to respond to what patients and the public say. So week 7, ethics. So is research right? And I remember being constantly amazed at this. Well, of course it's right. All research is right. Knowledge is power. Okay, but it's much more complicated than that, isn't it? Because you can't deny people some stuff, and it's not right to deny some people some treatments or investigations. So we talk about the background of ethics in human research. How did it come to be such a big thing? How do people earn money being ethicists for trials, for God's sake? Okay, and the background about the ethics in human research, where it came from Helsinki and the Tuskegee trials. What does an ethics committee want to know when you start applying for ethical approval for your studies? We'll talk about the chronology of acquiring ethical approval and the stages it goes through that your project will go through when looking for ethics approval. And we'll talk a bit about the study folder, which is an ongoing record of your trial and how important it is to be able to keep hold of that. Week 8, we'll start talking about how to actually do research and the practicalities of doing it day to day. We'll talk a bit about epidemiology, we'll talk about TWICS, we'll talk about using routine clinical data, the NIHR a bit more, the associate PI scheme, the role of the principal investigator in collecting data. And some of this will be sort of telling you what it is and how important something is or not in some cases. And some of it will be very practical information about this is how to collect data. These are some pitfalls that we've encountered in the past. And this is why you want to be a principal investigator and not necessarily a chief investigator in some cases. Week 9 is my favorite week, which is the numbers week. I like to try and phrase it as like a bake-off thing, but week 9 is going to be fun because that's going to be talking about statistics and the relevance of statistics in both planning and analyzing your study. And we'll spend a bit of time talking about some basic statistical tests in Statistics 101 and about some different kinds of analysis. And it's important to know those things because it influences how you collect your data and how you assemble it and what you're going to do with it. And all of that goes right the way back to what question are you going to ask and how you're going to design your study. Week 10 will be a chance to work on some posters. We're going to talk you through the format and content of successful posters, i.e. those ones that people stop and read versus those ones they just walk past. We're going to talk about how you can explain your poster to an audience and how you submit a poster to a conference and what sort of things they're going to look for to help choose those that are going to be published. Week 11, we look a bit more at papers and the vital elements of an academic paper, and we'll hopefully get some understanding of why some papers are published and why some papers aren't. And my experience goes back to that clinical bottom line. If it has a clear message, it gets in. If it doesn't, it doesn't. We're going to try and get some people from the Blizzard unit to explain some common failure points that they've encountered in their careers so far. I've certainly got a few to share. I'm sure the professor has some too. And hopefully we'll be able to help you avoid those pitfalls early on. And the last week is posters too. So we're hopefully going to get each of you to present a poster to the wider group to participate, and we're going to offer some critical evaluation and feedback, and there will be a prize for the #1 poster, which I will provide, and it will be worth having. We'll also spend a bit of time just explaining about some potential routes to surgical or clinical academic activity further on in life, through describing some of the NIHR fellowships, some alternative routes to developing a surgeon scientist career, and what other things you need to consider when you're thinking about a clinical academic career in the future. So that's what the course is going to look like over the coming 12 weeks. It is the first time it's run. It will be modified and tweaked as we go. And if you have certain things you want to talk about or want to not talk about, then do let us know. But I'm going to start off by talking about what is research. Now, painful though it is to say, we should try and make it as interactive as possible as to try and answer some of these questions. So rather than call out names, I'm just going to assume you're all grown-ups and want to participate. So who wants to offer a definition of what research is? Okay, so I'm clearly overwhelmed by by people volunteering. Charlotte, I can see you looking very focused at the screen here. So why don't you offer us a definition of what research is?
Clicking at the unmute button.
Yeah. Well, we'll start with you and then we'll go around the screen as it happens. But what do you think?
A piece of academic writing into a topic that needs some more research into to try and make something better.
Yeah, so we've used research in the definition of research, which is awesome, isn't it? That you can't fault that. So yeah, that's one way of putting it. Sultan, you're a fairly bright guy. What do you think? How would you define research?
I would define it as creating or testing knowledge, or testing or creating a hypothesis, and kind of either disproving, or kind of approving the hypothesis and seeing.
Yeah. Okay. So kind of testing your assumptions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Who else is bright? Kieran, you're fairly brainy, I recall. How would you define research from our perspective?
So I would think of it as sort of having an initial idea and wanting to explore that idea more.
Right.
So forming a structured plan and how you're going to do that and what you'd like to achieve. So like Sultan said, have a hypothesis and sort of delve into what is out there, but also what you can discover yourself in terms of, for example, in a lab or doing a research project where you gather data. So not only reviewing what's there, finding something new.
So you're talking about understanding what's already been done, determining a direction for new investigation, and then using those techniques to discover new stuff.
Yeah, and putting that out there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. Anybody else got anything else to add to that?
Right, can I chip in?
Yeah, if you must, I suppose.
So part of the objective of us doing this great set of sessions is that we kind of meet each other, because you guys are embarking on a hard road, okay? The academic clinical pathway is the harder option. And you're going to need to lean on your friends, and this is where you're going to start making those friends and colleagues. So it's going to be a lot easier if we turn on our cameras so we can at least see who each of us are. So I don't know whether you're all very nervous and shy, but you are going to need to meet each other.
Okay, guys, I think that's
They're going to go crazy. Simon's
Yeah,
at the back of his car, I'm impressed.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I'm commuting, so I don't know if my camera might make my connection worse, but I'll give it a try.
That was very professorial, wasn't it? Phrased as a suggestion, but actually an instruction. Okay, hi guys. So yeah, so research is, I think, we've had 3 definitions there, and they're all slightly different, aren't they? And the first thing you have to ask yourself is, well, what is it I'm trying to do with an academic clinical career here, right? Because it's not just turn up and gowns and caps and posh dinners, in central London and so on. Sadly, I wish it was that. It's a lot of graft. And the professor's absolutely right. This is absolutely not the easy route. Believe it or not, from a surgeon's perspective, doing the operations is the easy bit. Doing this is the hard bit. So these are some definitions that I found online, some of which you might recognize, some of which you don't. The dictionary says systematic investigation into study of materials and sources to establish facts and reach new conclusions. Well, I thought that was a bit closed, wasn't it? That to me said, well, you look at what's been done and you kind of assemble it in a new way and come up with an answer. So I thought, well, actually, medical research is perhaps different to, say, I don't know, doing historical research or doing materials research or chemistry or something like that, where the facts are just there. We just don't know what they are. And we're looking at trying to, almost create new facts, if you like. So I thought, well, medical research, that's different. And it came up, I think this is from somewhere in Chris Whitty's stuff in the NIHR when he was chair there, basically says, find out new stuff doing something to do with life. Research, including a wide range of fields, biology, chemistry, pharma, toxicology, goal of developing new medicines or procedures or applying these in new ways, can be preclinical or clinical. It's a massive thing. So what about clinical research? I thought, well, do you know what? We're all going to be clinicians in some way, if we're not already. So what about clinical research? How is that different? Well, if you dig around a bit more, clinical research is how we develop new treatments and knowledge for better health and care, building the evidence for new approaches that are safe and effective. So find out new stuff that works well. Again, it doesn't give you a list of things that mean that describe what you're going to do as a clinical researcher, right? Then I found a nice short one. Find new and better ways to make sick people better. Okay, well, doesn't take a genius to work that out. And then I thought this one starts to get a bit more specific, doesn't it? It's a branch of healthcare science. Okay, so acknowledging there are other branches that are doing other stuff, like quality improvement perhaps, or teaching, or, I don't know, sharing knowledge and so on, that determines safety and effectiveness, or the efficacy, when you're talking about drugs and medications and diagnostic products and treatments for human use. And then it starts to get nebulous again, the prevention, treatment, and diagnosis for relieving symptoms of disease. So essentially, you can see that there isn't a strict definition that helps you decide, well, is this the job I want to be doing or not, clinical research? But you're all touching on the same sort of thing, which is finding out new stuff and applying it to people who aren't well or could be not well, because you can look at prevention and so on. But it's difficult to know, isn't it? And the great thing about that is that academic medical practice or clinical research, you can go in any direction you want to. Okay, you can take in any direction you want to, and you can work hard to fulfill any of these, and all of them come under clinical research. So here's what I thought when I thought, well, what do I think clinical research is based on my experience and so on? I thought, well, one of the big things we do, especially in orthopedic surgery, is we test existing treatments. It's not often we come up with something new, like brand new to test. Not nowadays, because surgery's been around for so long. So we test the existing treatments and we try and work out which is the best or the safest, or which gives the longest benefit to a person, or what affects the most number of people in a positive way. And if you look at the big trials in orthopedic surgery, that's what most of them are. They're comparing one existing treatment with another existing treatment and trying to work out who that benefits the most for the longest, or who that benefits, or how that benefits the most number of people. You know, things like the FAME trial, looking at different treatments of ankles, things like the forthcoming lumbar fusion study, that we are definitely going to win, you know, fusion versus non-fusion and so on. So which is the best? And what's happened over the years is the ways of judging which are the best have developed. So we're getting better and better at answering those. Then I thought there's more to that, because occasionally we do bring new treatments to patients. So a science bod across the road in the blizzard will go, I've discovered a new drug that works on rats. I need to bring that treatment to people, because people are the most important. So how do I bring that treatment to people and test how good it is or not? And that's a whole nother science, isn't it? You know, testing a new drug and clinical trials to phase it in. And then those phase 4s where you're looking back at the effect of the drug or the treatment on people and comparing it to existing treatments and so on. And then I thought, but it goes beyond that, doesn't it, actually? Because what about things like diagnosis? So I'm not treating people, but maybe I can do clinical research to look at how good is a particular technique at diagnosing someone. What about things like MRI for strokes versus CTs for strokes or something like that? I'm not testing treatments, but I'm testing diagnoses. Well, there's a whole nother science and things there, isn't there, about clinical trials. So there's a third branch, testing the tests. And then I thought, this was just before I came on, I thought actually it goes one step beyond that, doesn't it? Because what you could do is you can do clinical research to design the tests that test the tests. So you could do methodological research and clinical research. So, and I came up with, well, that's testing the tests that test the tests. And you can kind of take that ad infinitum, can't they? But that's the way to lots of citations, being the one who designs the tests that test the tests. Okay. And so some people will move into clinical research, into designing methodologies which can then be employed by other scientists. And then I thought, actually, even outside of all of that, which puts you very much in a lab or in a hospital or something, what about disease prevention? So population health. And COVID is a great example of that, isn't it? Which beats anything we've ever done, hands down. How do we function on a huge population level in a very clinical trial setting, testing vaccines or testing the communication of COVID and those sorts of things, have relied on clinical people from the get-go? So, you know, you kind of clinical research crosses everything, you know, right the way from methodological stuff, right the way through to what you're doing with that patient in front of you in the operating room. Okay. And so, again, you can see there's no definite way of really brilliantly describing clinical research. And every department of clinical research needs people who want to do all these things. So I'm sure the professor will tell you that a number of times over the years, people will knock on the door and come in and say, I want to do some research, and sit down and go, here I am. I can do this nice, tidy little bit of research, get my name on the Nobel Prize and walk off into the sunset covered in glory. But why should you do some research? What does it do, you know, for the world, for you, and so on? And why is it that despite being a spine surgeon in London, which means I should definitely be driving a Ferrari by now, do I do clinical research instead of traipsing down to the private hospital all the time? Well, here's what I thought. Number one, it's definitely the harder route. It is at times very heart-sink to be involved in clinical research when you can do a lot of work and it amounts to nothing. And just this morning, I've looked at a forthcoming conference and everybody presenting and realized my name's only in it 3 times and everybody else is in it 6. It's immensely difficult to do. But why do I do it? Well, I see problems with the world. Everywhere I look, I don't understand why people are doing what they do. And I find it incredibly frustrating when, to me, it's done because it's always been like that. I want to solve the problems, and it does get me out of bed and it wakes me up at night thinking about problems and gets me kind of buzzing and wanting to answer those. And I know for some of you that's the case, and we've talked about robotics, we've talked about day case surgery and stuff with some of you watching. But it really does get me up and makes me think, well, you know, I can fix 2 people today by doing decompressions, or 1 million people if I can do some cool statistics on some data and show that one treatment works better than another. I definitely want to make the world better than it is now, and I know that will apply to each of you. And I find it immensely challenging. Medicine itself is pretty easy, especially orthopedic surgery. Okay, it's just applying the rules that someone else teaches you, yeah? Doing clinical research and being part of that world is really challenging because there's no direction. There's not enough people in the world to be doing comprehensive research in every branch of medicine. So sometimes you're the only person working in that field or one of a very small group. And it's immensely challenging, and it's hugely rewarding to come to a conclusion that's robust and disseminate that around the world. And I think you'll find that if you move with purpose through clinical research, that the same will apply to you. And then Steve Jobs, many years ago, it's 10 years since he died today, as it happens, talked about denting the universe. You will all do great things in clinical practice if you choose not to do this, and you'll save, lots of lives and be covered in glory and all end up in heaven, right? But if you really want to make a dent in the universe and change human care and human medicine and human health, research is the only way to do that. And think about all the famous doctors and physios and so on that right? They're all researchers. So what does clinical research do? Okay, so I thought, well, there's going to be some external benefits and some internal benefits, right? So unfortunately, because you've all now shared your pictures, I can't see names, but Neseth, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, but what do you think the external benefits of doing Neseth, thank you. What do you think some of the external benefits, if you like, for the world as a whole are for doing clinical research?
You can improve the standard of healthcare that a lot of people, like the general population, can receive, and you could also increase the number of treatment options that people can receive.
Yeah. So that's interesting, isn't it? Because people talk about increasing the number of options. In my mind, one of them is the best one. I just don't know which one. But yeah, you're right. Okay. Yassine, what do you reckon? External benefits, so not yourself, but for the world as a whole. What do you think?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess less waste in terms of if you know what the best treatment is, you're not wasting money or resources doing something that's actually not very effective.
Yeah. Any others? Not sure. That's okay.
I mean, I guess this is really broad. This is more economic stuff. But I mean, if you've got a more useful treatment or more useful whatever it is, I guess you've got people being healthier worldwide. Generally, if people are healthier, there's less waste in terms of for example, you lose a lot of waste. For example, GDP, etc. All that's calculated from the workforce, and if you have the workforce healthier generally, then technically you're going to be a more productive economy.
Yeah, okay. Spoken like a businessman. I like it. Very nice. Salman, what do you reckon?
In terms of external benefits, I mean, the one that comes to me straight away is just trying to relieve the stress that's on the NHS right now, and trying to get rid of a lot of the red tape that's associated. Like you said, there's a number of procedures, but only a couple of them are the best. So it's trying to figure out which one is the best, and can we show that it's populations, and that's the main thing that comes to my mind.
Yeah. Okay, tidy. So okay, Sultan, what do you reckon?
For external benefits?
Yeah,
I agree. I think it's about finding what is the most appropriate treatment solutions for people on a wider aspect, what is the most efficient. And it's basically making sure that it's all populations or different populations have the best treatment. So everyone is different, and knowing what is most suitable for them.
Yeah. So I just want to stick to that. It's gone in a direction I didn't necessarily expect, which is cool. So, talking about waste and cost, and, essentially that's the idea, if I think about it, of that we have a finite pot, right? And we can only do, once we've done what we've done, we can't do something else for someone else, right? But that's a very kind of UK public service way of looking at it, right? So why don't we develop that idea a bit more and say, well, what if we had no limits? What if we were all talking in California now with essentially infinite dollars, and we could do whatever we wanted for whoever we wanted, because they'll just hand over their Diners Club card and pay for it? Does clinical research then have much less external benefit if waste isn't an issue, or if economic value is less of an issue? What do you reckon? Yassine, what do you reckon? You're the businessman.
I mean, if we're talking external and we don't care about wasting, then I mean, technically when we progress, the reason we progress is to try and make things better. But if these guys don't care and they have just the money to throw away, externally, yeah, it's not a massive deal, but you still have the impact of that person might actually not have a good outcome, which then has an impact externally. So you still have that aspect, but in terms of like a money financial aspect, it doesn't have an impact because they don't care. They've got the money.
Yeah. But I think you touched on it there, didn't you? There's a level of impact of research that goes beyond the kind of economic and the maths of it, right? If somebody is going to have a happier life because they've had a hip replacement rather than a whole sequence of hip injections for arthritis, then that might not necessarily have a economic benefit, but it will have a lifestyle or kind of a external from you kind of benefit to them, because they'll just have a happier life, if you like, a less painful life. And that's much harder to put into numeric values. People try, okay, but it's much harder to do. So, there's benefits in terms of purely the maths and the sums, but those don't stand up, across the board, if you like. And not least of all, you can imagine if you're investigating less common diseases, which have an incidence of, say, 1 in a million, there still warrant investigations, even though the economic and kind of hard balance of benefit there doesn't necessarily work it doesn't necessarily strengthen your case. Do you see what I'm getting at? What about internal benefits then? What are the benefits of doing clinical research to you as an individual? So I can see I've got Kiran and I've got a Harkiran as well, Harkiran Sagu. What, from your perspective, what do you think the internal benefits to you are of doing clinical research?
For me, obviously, it depends on the person, but the satisfaction of being one of the core person or responsible for making that change that actually happened. So you mentioned hip replacement, and I was thinking about quality of life, being able to walk without the pain, and knowing that wouldn't have happened without your contributions to self-satisfaction and a lot of it, to be honest.
Absolutely. And I'm really glad you said that. Just going back to external benefits, these are ones I could think of. It brings health and improvements to people and humanity. It reduces disparity. So why should some people get one treatment over another? It raises the profile of your department and your university. No one said that, but that is just the reality of life. It's important. It brings in more resource so we can do more work. And it just kind of moves humanity forward. And I'll just write, you never know where research will go. I had a paper referenced in relation to spines on the space station, and I thought, that's cool. But internal benefits, I'm really glad you said satisfaction. So for me, if I'm being totally honest, I love the idea that people are talking about Brett Ruckus and his awesome work. Okay, that's not a small thing for me. I'm being totally honest there. It doesn't earn me money. It doesn't earn me anything. It keeps me up at night. But I love the idea that when people talk about spines and the output, my name's in that mix. Overcoming the challenge we talked about, there's nothing wrong with a bit of pride and glory and rewards. I got my job because of the academic work I'd done in the past. And it helps reach the top of your career. Anybody know who this is? So this is Jonas Salk, who was a physician in the States who invented the polio vaccine. Now, he was a rubbish doctor, but an amazing researcher. And I was going to say everybody knows his name now, but none of you do. But, he set the world on fire and changed human healthcare forever because of his clinical research. Okay, but he chose to turn his back on clinical stuff. And I mean, he's gone down in history, and I think that would be cool to be like that too. Know you change the world. Be the authority in something. Some of you will do PhDs and you'll be the cleverest person about that particular thing on the face of the planet, and that's good. And it does open the best opportunities in medicine, really, by being a researcher. So I wanted to move through that quite quickly because I want to get to this idea of what is the best. You've all said there's better, best. We want the best for this, the best for that. What is the best? What do you mean by saying the best of something? Kieran, what do you think? We all talked about we want to do the best care for people, but what does that actually mean? Because best for me, as a 39-year-old person who grew up in the UK, is going to be different to perhaps for you, is going to be different to Lauren sat there on her phone in the meeting room. What do you think is meant by the best?
That's a really hard question.
Yeah.
Because it varies. Like, for example, if there was a particular treatment for one patient, the best for them will be very different to somebody else.
Yeah.
But if I'm going to take it in a very broad sense, then I guess the absolute best of anything, I think, would be where you're seeing benefit and there's no, how do I say so, downsides or side effects, no side effects, no downsides of something, but just the benefits. And that, for me, would be the best.
Okay.
If that was any treatment. But obviously in a specific way, someone might, for example, I can't think of a hip replacement. The best would be able to walk again, not have to worry anymore, like all these things. But somebody else might, but that wouldn't be the best because maybe they don't want an artificial in their leg.
Good.
So, or any other reason. So the best varies for everyone. But as I guess it's balancing the downsides and the benefits of something.
Yeah. Charlotte, what do you think? What's the best? We all say the best, the best, the best. We want the best this, best that.
Probably something that's kind of desirable and important to that person. Everybody might have very different opinions about what they think is best. I guess it's kind of important to what is meaningful for that person at that point in time as well.
Yeah. So you're both right, aren't you? You know, it's a very individual thing. What's best for me is I get massive glory and a Nobel Prize for my project. What's best for a patient might be something different. Now, why is that a problem? Why is the individual definition of best, whatever that is, a problem for clinical research? Yassine, why do you think?
I guess it guides your aims a bit different because if your best is you're looking to make yourself whatever, like glory or whatever, you might not look actually obviously this is very unethical, but you might not look at maybe what will be the best for that individual person. And also it's difficult because you can't treat everyone's best. So you're never going to get, so
Exactly. Now, number one, 2 points in that, aren't there? Number one is there's nothing wrong with me wanting to do the best stuff and, you know, cover myself in glory. This, you know, we're being completely honest here, aren't we? You know, there has to be some sort of satisfaction, which I think Kieran said earlier. There has to be some sort of satisfaction for us as individual clinical researchers, doesn't there? Or we're just not going to do it. Okay. Now that would be different for all of us, but that's important. But second of all, you've all said the individual, but clinical research doesn't deal with the individuals, does it? We're dealing with big groups of people, populations, and so on. So we need to think about what exactly do we mean by the best and for who? Okay. So do we mean, you know, the best of a very specific population? An example, and we've gone with hip replacements just because in orthopedic surgery, everybody goes to hip replacements, you know. Are we talking about, you know, elderly people in East London who live in a certain section of society with a certain severity of arthritis who would agree to have a hip replacement? Or are we looking at the whole population, anybody in London who turns up with bad hip of whatever cause? And so those bests are going to be very different, aren't they? You know, for a whole population, the best is probably non-surgical treatment. But for a specific population, it might be something different. And so you have to start thinking of this idea, and I wanted to develop over the coming few weeks, of actually what question are we starting to ask here, and who is that question relevant to? Who is the best treatment that we're looking to find relevant to? Okay. Some work, and you will see as you start to evaluate papers later on in the program, are very much designed to be best for the particular author and their career. Okay, so people ask a question that helps them. And this is not insignificant when you look at sources of funding and so on for projects. Something might have been done and a conclusion drawn, not because it's best for that population. And it's very cynical, I appreciate, but it is what it is. Is it best for the methodologists? Have they taken the easy way out? Have they not looked at things closely enough just because it was enough to get it published and get their word out to meet their own need for best and so on? And don't forget the funding. We'll talk about that more, but it's really critical that this should be the first question you ask when you look at any study. Is it best for the funders? If I design a hip replacement and I give you the right to do a study, I want you to say that mine is the best for pretty much everybody. Okay, and so all these people, all these groups have a different definition of what is the best. So when you're starting to think over the next week about your questions and how you formulate questions, deciding what is the best is fine, but who is it the best for? And that's really what you have to focus on when you start to assemble your questions. And then, of course, the development of that idea is how do you measure what's best? Well, once you know who you're thinking about, who it's best for, then you can start thinking, well, how am I going to measure it for that particular group of people? And to do that, and we're getting towards the end, so I'm going to move along, is thinking about outcomes. Usually, I suspect that's what someone would have said, is, well, we measure the outcome of the treatment in that particular group to see how well we're doing. But which outcomes are relevant? Somebody said a great example there of, well, for somebody it might be, I want to walk my dog 10 miles a day. For somebody else, it might be, I want to sit and watch the snooker pain-free, all afternoon. So the outcomes for those different groups of people are going to be very different. But how do we measure them in a way that it's comparable and analyzable so that we know what impact our treatment has had? And we're going to spend some time talking about outcomes and so on. But you see how convoluted and complex it becomes when you start to think, well, actually, what's best and for who, and how am I going to tell what's best? And I mentioned earlier on about the clinical bottom line. And I'll say again, that's what it's all about. Doing a massive project and saying, ta-da, option A beats option B in this niche population and so on is great. But what does that mean for the practitioners on the front line? Because 99% of clinical people aren't interested in research at all. They want you to tell them, do this or do that for this patient. And the clinical bottom line is key in every output you come up with, posters, papers, presentations, whatever. The clinical bottom line is what counts. So look, we're right at the end now, and we've timed it pretty well, and we've covered a bit of ground. But here's where we're going to go. And you've already seen these earlier on when we started. But we're starting to work now towards formulating a research question, aren't we, by thinking about what's best and what does that mean for a group and how are we going to measure it? And we're going to move through these learning objectives as we move through the next 12 weeks. But hopefully you've got an idea where we're going to go, and I hope it's pitched at the right sort of level. But these are things that I really wish I'd thought about when I started doing my research rather than just doing what I was told for a reason I wasn't sure of, using a method I didn't understand by someone I was only vaguely sure what they did. Any questions?
No, it's fine. Brett, I just wanted to ask, is it okay if we get those slides sent out to us a bit later?